guys, it's Christina of CraftyPaws. I wanted to welcome you to the Diemond Dies Summer YouTube Hop. This is the largest hop we've ever had. There are 25 guest designers plus the regular design team, and Diemond Dies is going to be giving away one $50 gift certificate and three $10 gift certificates. Now, what do you have to do to enter? All you have to do is be a YouTube subscriber to the Diemond Dies YouTube channel. Leave a comment on the Diemond Dies hop video, like that video, and then leave a comment on each of the guest designers and regular designers hop videos. You have until July 10th to participate. My goal with this project was to really see how I could stretch these dies. So normally when you see a die like this, you think of it as a silhouette. These are a couple of samples of cast or clean and simple cards that I made with that deer die and wood veneer paper. But I wanted to see how easy or difficult it would be to make them look more realistic. So I'm going to share with you guys the process of not only coloring up these beautiful deer, but also the trees and then the construction of this three-dimensional scene card. I die cut the 3 deer from 140-pound Strathmore watercolor paper, and I'm using a We Are Memory Keepers quick stick pokey tool to get it out of the die. And here I'm showing you my hack for a craft mat, which is to put a plain piece of white cardstock in a plastic sleeve. Some people use like a laminated piece of cardstock. Now I'm showing you how I'm going to blend on some color onto these little die cut deer. This is coming out really strong because I think my ink pad was too juicy, but just dabbing off the excess color with a tissue seemed to lighten up the color perfectly. That first color is Scattered Straw, and this next color is Tea Dye. I wanted to make it a little bit more brown and less yellow, but I wanted to keep this fawn really light, but not too light because I wanted to make sure that the spots that I was going to draw on later would show up in contrast. Now for the mama deer, I'm starting with tea dye, so she has a little bit of a darker base. And I'm just being careful to dab first on my little makeshift craft mat and then apply the ink so that it's not oversaturating the paper. And you'll see that I'm also trying to draw in a little bit of kind of where the legs are. The die cut doesn't have the different layers or levels of the image, so it's really simple, just drawing a little bit of a line there to indicate the back haunch. And I know it looks a little scary. I'm using the Tim Holtz Distress tea dye marker, but now you'll see with a little water from a water brush, you can soften up those lines and really have them blend into the area that you blended in with the ink. Now moving on to the stag, I start this time again with tea dye, just blending it in with my finger dauber. And you'll notice I'm also leaving the underbelly of these deer white because that's how they are in nature. Now I'm going to make the stag a little bit darker. So I'm taking some gathered twigs and I'm using another finger dauber and blending that in. I really like making the stag a little bit darker. That's how they seem to be in nature, at least the pictures that I saw on Google Images. And again, I'm just trying to be careful not to contaminate one color to the next. Now for the antlers, I didn't want to leave them stark white, so I'm blending in some old paper. Because the finger daubers are not super precise, there were some areas that I wanted to lighten or make more white. So I'm taking picket fence and I'm going over the areas that I wanted to make lighter again, and I'm dabbing it off with a tissue, and that seems to work brilliantly. Picket white is almost like an alcohol blender marker would be. It removes color, but you have to keep making sure that you keep the nib of that picket white marker clean. So I am lightening up the front part of the stag's neck as well as the underbelly where I got a little too much ink going on, and I really like how that brightened certain areas and made the deer look more dimensional. To add some little details, I'm using a Sakura white jelly roll pen to add some dots onto the backs of the baby fawn as well as the mama deer. The white jelly roll pen is fantastic for adding little details as well as fixing errors. So you saw me there coloring up the base of the stag's antlers because I had gotten some ink accidentally there, and I'm also adding some little details like the underside of the deer's tails. Now again, to add the musculature of the stag, I'm using a Tim Holtz Distress marker in Gathered Twigs, and I'm just putting in the top parts of these legs. And I'm making sure I'm doing that for the leg that's in the front of the image as opposed to the one in the back. Sometimes it's hard to tell with dies, but if you just look at the die carefully, you can see that which leg should be in the front and which leg should be in the back. And I softened up those lines with a water brush. Now to draw in the little eyes and noses. These are basically just little oblong dots, and I first thought about trying to use black soot, but I thought that would look too harsh against the soft colors of the blended inks and the watercolored marker. So I am actually using Gathered Twigs. For the baby fawn, I use the fine tip point, but for the stag and the deer, I use the felt tip point, and it worked beautifully. As long as you don't blend that out with a water brush or something, it actually stays pretty much in place. Here I'm continuing to use the Gathered Twigs marker to draw in the hooves of the deer. And again, without blending, it looks almost too dark, so I do take a water brush to the hooves just to soften them up a little bit. At this point, I realized that I've forgotten to draw in the shadow underneath the deer's heads. I need to do that so that it kind of separates the face from the neck. Otherwise, it looks kind of like one long piece. So all I'm doing is taking tea dye in the case of the fawn and Gathered Twigs and tea dye in the case of the stag and the deer. And all I'm doing is drawing in the side of the face and then a tiny space under the nose, and then I'm blending it out with my water brush. And it's really simple. I'm repeating it here because the first time I did it with Gathered Twigs, and then when I dabbed it up with a tissue, more of it came off. Watercoloring is so super forgiving, especially on characters like this. You just draw on the line, looks a little too thick, blend it out with a water brush, dab it with a tissue, and you can see a faint line there. And if you need it a little darker, go back in and reapply. And that's it for inking and detailing these deer die cuts. Like the deer, I die cut the pine trees out of 140-pound Strathmore watercolor paper, and I'm using finger daubers to ink on some mowed lawn and pine needles. And I'm generally trying to do the blending of this ink kind of from side to side, not vertically and not in circles. I don't know that it matters so much, but I wanted there to be kind of the feeling of boughs of color. So I'll do a swath of mowed lawn, alternating with swaths of pine needles, going back and forth. And it's, again, very forgiving. You don't have to be very exact about this because the details are going to come in the next step. For the tree trunks, I'm putting on a base coat of tea dye, dabbed a little bit of it off after using a water brush, and then I put in details, the kind of lines of a tree trunk with Gathered Twigs. To add some depth of color and the feeling of tree branches or the shadows created by boughs of trees, I'm using pine needles, that marker, and just kind of making squiggly lines horizontally across the tree. I'm not doing straight lines. I'm making them intentionally squiggly because in nature there are no straight lines. And I'm using my water brush and I'm blending those out. This is, again, super forgiving, really easy to do, and I think after adding in kind of a couple layers of color this way, it really gives a lot of dimension and the feeling of real trees rather than kind of flat die cuts. I'm going to show you this one more time on the larger pine tree, and again, I'm just going over making squiggly horizontal lines across the pine tree with pine needles, and then I'm going to be blending it out, just making sure that I don't get harsh lines. I'm blending it out with my water brush again. And this is a Pentel water brush. It's really inexpensive on Amazon. Some people don't like how much water comes out of it, but I've never had a problem with it. Now I'm taking some plain, ordinary copy paper and I'm tearing it to create a mask that I'm going to be using to create a kind of foreground, background, and then a sky area with clouds. The back area of the meadow I'm trying to create, I'm going to be blending out with Tim Holtz Distress ink in Twisted Citron. It's a pale kind of summery green, and I'm just starting my blending from the torn paper down toward the bottom of the cardstock. And I like that torn edge because I feel like that, again, is not a straight line. It's not, exact, because nothing in nature is like that. The foreground was done in Mowed Lawn, the middle ground in Twisted Citron, and the background was also Twisted Citron, but just a little lighter. For the sky, I'm using Tumbled Glass, and I'm just kind of going around the edges of the card. Now, I decide I don't want it to be a plain blue all the way across. I'm going to use the mask again and create the feeling of clouds. For the very front of the foreground, I decided it would be fun to have some grass blades. So I take the Diemond Dies grass border die and I'm inking it up with Twisted Citron, and then to give a little bit more depth to it, I'm going to use Mowed Lawn for the lower half of the grass. Matching the color of this grass to the foreground that I just blended on really worked out well for that continuity, but yet adding a little bit of texture and interest. To create a frame for this scene, I use the Diemond Dies Cross Stitch Squares dies. I use the largest and then the second largest to just create a frame. And I'm going to glue on the blades of grass to the very front of the lower part of this frame so that the grass kind of tucks around and the edges are just in front of the frame. And then I'm going to cut off the excess. So now for putting together all of the pieces, I dry fit, kind of pretty much estimating where I wanted each of the trees and the deer to be on the landscape, and I'm using art glitter glue to glue everything down. I love this glue with a fine tip nozzle because it dries absolutely clear and is matte. I am trying to make sure that the deer and the stag are actually having some of their hooves in front of the cut grass border and some behind, so it looks like they're coming forward out of the framed scene. And I'm being careful to make sure that I glue in those hooves so they don't, dangle around loose. And I am also going to put that biggest pine tree on the front and have it overlap the front of the frame as well, because I want the scene to kind of pop out of this card. After I get all the front elements glued in, I'm going to put on the back double-sided foam adhesive. I've skipped over most of that, but I'll show you a little bit, particularly on the neck of the stag and the deer, where I'm putting 2 layers of double-sided foam adhesive so that the heads kind of look like they're coming out even further, looking forward. Now I'm going to take all the double-sided foam adhesive release paper off and then carefully position this front layer on top of the card. Now you'll notice that I didn't put double-sided foam adhesive behind the antlers of the stag, but in order to reinforce the strength of those antlers, I'm putting glossy accents over top of them. It not only gives a nice sheen to the antlers, but it also makes them more stable. I also put glossy accents on top of the eyes and the noses of all of the deer, as well as on their hooves. Now, this card could be for any occasion, for a man or a woman, but I wanted to include a little sentiment. So I took the hello from the Diemond Dies word die set #1, and I made a little ombre color using Twisted Citron and Mowed Lawn, and I'm just gluing that in place in the upper right-hand corner. I hope you've enjoyed this process video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to leave a comment for your chance to win one of the great prizes from Diemond Dies. Diemond Dies is also having a sale now through July 10th, 2016. Use the coupon code HOP15 and you'll get 15% off, free worldwide shipping, and there's no minimum purchase. Now keep on hopping, and thanks for watching.